The crystal chandeliers hanging beneath the vaulted ceiling of the historic Manhattan ballroom bathed everything in warm golden light. But no amount of elegance could hide the growing tension that had settled over the room like an approaching storm. Nearly 300 distinguished guests sat at perfectly arranged tables, draped in ivory silk, surrounded by towering arrangements of white orchids and roses flown in from Europe only hours earlier. A world-class orchestra continued playing soft classical music as though nothing was wrong, yet every musician had begun exchanging uncertain glances. They had repeated the same melodies for almost 2 hours. This was never meant to be an ordinary wedding. Every invitation had been personally approved by the governing council of several of America's oldest legitimate mafia families. Around the ballroom sat respected council elders whose decisions influenced international shipping routes, luxury hospitality groups, private investment offices, logistics empires, charitable foundations, and billion-dollar family trusts. Beside them were renowned attorneys, retired federal judges, international bankers, diplomats, succession advisors, and executives responsible for managing businesses spread across 4 continents. They had gathered to witness more than a marriage. They had come to witness the formal alliance of 2 powerful families. Instead, they were watching history collapse. Behind the ornate double doors leading into the bridal preparation room, Isabella Morty rested both trembling hands against the polished mahogany frame. Her wedding gown shimmered beneath the soft lighting, handcrafted over thousands of hours by Italian artisans, yet it suddenly felt unbearably heavy. Every layer of lace seemed to tighten around her chest until breathing itself became difficult. She had stopped looking at the clock nearly 30 minutes earlier. She no longer needed to. The silence had become its own answer. Damian Russell was not coming. Outside the room, the whispers grew louder. They say his private jet left Westchester. I heard he crossed state lines. Someone posted him at Teterboro Airport. My nephew just sent me a picture. It can't be true. It is. He abandoned the wedding. Every sentence struck Isabella harder than the last. Phones lit up across the ballroom almost simultaneously. One notification became 10. 10 became 50. Within minutes, every guest seemed to be staring down at glowing screens instead of the magnificent floral altar waiting at the front of the room. Someone quietly laughed. Another tried unsuccessfully to hide a smirk. A third pretended sympathy while eagerly forwarding screenshots to another guest. The scandal was already spreading across private social circles, encrypted messaging groups, and social media platforms faster than anyone could contain it. The wedding that was supposed to symbolize stability had become entertainment. A white bouquet slipped from Isabella's fingers and landed softly on the polished marble floor. Her closest friend, Alina, immediately picked it up before anyone inside the bridal room noticed. We can still stop this, Alina whispered, gripping Isabella's hand. We'll tell everyone there's been an emergency. Your family will understand. Isabella gave a hollow smile that disappeared almost immediately. They already know. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. They all know. She didn't need confirmation. She could hear it. The ballroom beyond those doors no longer sounded like guests attending a wedding. It sounded like spectators waiting for a public execution. Suddenly, another voice echoed through the hallway. Her aunt. Loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. I've never seen anything like this. Another relative answered quietly. Poor Isabella. Then came another. I feel worse for Don Marco. That sentence hurt the most. Not because it mentioned her father, but because it was true. Don Marco Morty had spent decades earning respect through discipline, diplomacy, and flawless governance. His word carried enormous weight inside the council. Today's wedding was intended to strengthen alliances that had taken years to negotiate. Now every one of those alliances stood beneath a cloud of humiliation. Across the ballroom, Don Marco stood near the altar with both fists tightly clenched. His silver hair remained perfectly combed. His tailored charcoal suit remained immaculate. Only his eyes betrayed the fury burning underneath. A senior security commander quietly approached him. "Sir." Don Marco never looked away from the ballroom entrance. "Find him immediately. If Damien Russ was still in this country." His voice was frighteningly calm. "Bring him to me." The security commander hesitated. "We'll need authorization to mobilize multiple teams." "You have it." Nearby council members exchanged uneasy glances. Several understood exactly what those orders meant. Within minutes, investigators, intelligence coordinators, aviation specialists, and private security units belonging to the Morty family office would begin searching every airport, marina, and private airfield connected to the Russell family. This was no longer simply about a wedding. It had become an institutional crisis. Inside the bridal room, Isabella closed her eyes. This wasn't how she imagined the happiest day of her life. Years of planning, months of preparation, countless family negotiations. Everything had collapsed before she even reached the altar. She wasn't thinking about the expensive flowers, or the orchestra, or the guests. She kept asking herself only one question. Why? The orchestra abruptly stopped playing. The silence that followed spread through the ballroom like a ripple across still water. Everyone turned toward the entrance. The massive carved doors slowly opened. A single man walked inside. His movements were measured, unhurried, confident enough that people instinctively stepped aside before he reached them. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that seemed almost understated despite the wealth it represented. His expression remained calm, unreadable, yet his presence altered the atmosphere of the entire ballroom within seconds. Council elders straightened in their seats. Bank executives quietly stood. Family advisors lowered their voices. Even Don Marco's security detail instinctively relaxed their defensive posture. Only one man commanded that kind of silent respect. Lorenzo De Luca, chairman of the De Luca Family Council, owner of one of the largest legitimate shipping and logistics empires in the world. The youngest billionaire mafia boss ever to unite multiple governing families under a single commercial alliance. Nobody expected him. Nobody understood why he had come. Without acknowledging the hundreds of stunned faces surrounding him, Lorenz continued walking directly toward the bridal room. His eyes found Isabella immediately. For one brief second, neither of them spoke. He simply looked at her, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with quiet understanding. Then he stepped close enough that no one else could hear. His deep voice barely disturbed the silence. "Pretend I'm the groom." Isabella stared at him in complete disbelief. She searched his face for the smallest hint that this was some cruel joke. She found none. Only calm certainty. Behind them, 300 guests waited. Her father's security team stood ready. Council members watched every movement. The future of two powerful families balanced on the next decision she made. And standing before her was the most powerful mafia boss in America, offering her an escape that made absolutely no sense. Isabella's pulse thundered in her ears as Lorenzo's outstretched hand remained steady between them. Every instinct told her this was impossible, yet every whispered laugh drifting through the ballroom reminded her that walking away would not end the humiliation. It would immortalize it. She searched his face one last time, expecting uncertainty, but found only absolute resolve. Before she could answer, the towering ballroom doors closed behind him with a deep echo that silenced every conversation. 300 influential guests fixed their attention on the pair standing only a few steps from the altar, waiting to see whether the Morty family would collapse under public disgrace or somehow survive the unthinkable. Lorenzo slowly turned toward the crowd before anyone else could speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in a calm voice that carried effortlessly across the ballroom, "I apologize for the unexpected delay. Certain family matters required immediate attention, but the ceremony will now proceed." The confidence in his tone was so complete that confusion briefly replaced gossip. Council elders exchanged cautious glances while family attorneys instinctively reached for their briefcases, sensing something extraordinary was unfolding. Even Don Marco paused before giving another order to his security commander. Lorenz was not a man who made reckless decisions. If he had stepped into the center of this disaster, there had to be a reason no one else could yet see. The officiant stood frozen beside the altar until Lorenzo approached him with a slim black leather portfolio. Inside were officially stamped legal documents, emergency marriage authorizations recognized by the Family Governance Council, and identity records already verified by senior legal advisors. Gasps swept across the ballroom as one attorney quietly confirmed every signature was authentic. Isabella stared at the documents in disbelief. "How is this possible?" she whispered. Without looking away from the officiant, Lorenzo answered softly, "The council prepares for institutional emergencies. I simply chose to use the protocol." His explanation raised more questions than it answered. Why would such a protocol even exist, and why did he carry it personally? Across the room, Damien Russo's father suddenly rose from his chair, fury burning in his eyes. "You cannot replace my son like a business contract," he shouted. Lorenzo faced him without the slightest change in expression. "Your son abandoned an agreement witnessed by every major family represented here. Today is no longer about his choices. It is about preserving stability for everyone his decision endangered." Silence followed. No one challenged the truth in those words. Every council elder understood that broken alliances invited chaos, weakened confidence, and encouraged rivals to exploit division. Lorenz was not rescuing a wedding alone. He was preventing an institutional crisis from spreading across multiple family enterprises. Isabella looked toward her father. Don Marco's face remained stern, but the rage had faded into careful calculation. He had spent decades leading negotiations, and now he recognized the impossible reality before him. Lorenzo was offering his family dignity instead of disgrace. Their eyes met across the ballroom, and after what felt like an eternity, Don Marco gave the smallest nod. It was not approval, it was trust. Isabella slowly placed her trembling hand into Lorenzo's. His grip was warm, steady, and reassuring, anchoring her against the storm threatening to consume her. As the orchestra cautiously began playing once more, the massive council doors suddenly opened again. A breathless intelligence officer hurried inside, leaned toward Lorenzo, and whispered only 6 chilling words. "Boss, Damien wasn't acting alone." Color drained from Lorenzo's face for only a fraction of a second before his expression returned to its usual calm, but Isabella noticed the change. She had spent years reading boardrooms, negotiations, and silent disagreements inside the Morty family office. She recognized the look of a man who had just received dangerous information. Without turning toward the intelligence officer again, Lorenzo simply nodded once. "Continue surveillance. Nobody leaves this hotel until I give the order." The officer disappeared into the crowd as quietly as he had arrived. Around them, the orchestra continued playing while hundreds of guests remained unaware that something far greater than a failed wedding had begun unfolding behind polished smiles and champagne glasses. The officiant cleared his throat and resumed the ceremony, but Isabella barely heard the words. Her attention remained fixed on Lorenzo. He stood beside her with complete confidence, yet she sensed his mind was calculating dozens of possibilities at once. Every entrance to the ballroom was now discreetly watched by DeLuca security personnel dressed as ordinary guests. Family attorneys quietly moved between tables, collecting phones from several council members before encrypted conversations could spread beyond the room. This was no longer damage control. Someone was containing information before it reached the outside world, and only Lorenzo seemed to understand why. When the ceremony finally ended and applause filled the ballroom, Lorenzo leaned closer, his smile convincing enough to fool every camera pointed at them. "Do exactly what I do," he whispered. "Smile, greet everyone, and never let them see your fear." Isabella nodded, though questions burned inside her. As they moved through the reception line, she noticed several council elders greeting Lorenzo with unusual respect. They were not congratulating him. They were quietly thanking him. Whatever crisis, he had prevented reached far beyond her broken wedding. During the reception, Lorenzo guided her toward a quieter gallery overlooking the Hudson River. The music faded behind heavy oak doors as Isabella finally stopped pretending. "Tell me the truth," she demanded. "That officer didn't come because of Damien. Something else is happening." Lorenzo remained silent for several moments before removing a folded photograph from his jacket. It showed Damien entering a private airport hangar the previous evening. Standing beside him was a man Isabella immediately recognized despite the baseball cap hiding most of his face. He was Victor Salerno, one of the most respected council advisors and a trusted friend of both their families. Lorenzo's voice became colder than the winter wind outside. "Your wedding was never the target, Isabella. Someone used Damien to begin a takeover of every major family represented in this ballroom." Isabella stared at the photograph as if it might somehow change in her hands. Victor Salerno had attended family dinners since she was a teenager. He had advised succession councils, negotiated international shipping agreements, and earned the confidence of nearly every respected family represented in the ballroom. Seeing him beside Damien only hours before the wedding shattered everything she believed. "There has to be an explanation," she whispered, but even she no longer believed those words. Lorenzo slowly folded the photograph and slipped it back into his jacket. "There is," he replied quietly, "and that's exactly what frightens me." His eyes swept across the ballroom through the glass doors. Every smiling guest suddenly looked like a potential witness to something far darker than public humiliation. Inside the reception, crystal glasses clinked as conversations resumed, yet Lorenzo's security division had already transformed the celebration into a silent investigation. Trusted advisors casually positioned themselves near exits, while compliance officers disguised as event coordinators collected guest lists, seating charts, and surveillance records from the hotel. Nobody panicked, because nobody realized the ballroom had quietly become the center of an intelligence operation. Isabella watched Lorenzo direct everything with subtle gestures that barely attracted attention. There were no shouted orders or dramatic confrontations. His authority flowed through discipline alone, and every person under his command responded instantly without question. "Why would Victor risk everything?" Isabella asked as they walked along a private corridor lined with portraits of New York's oldest families. Lorenzo stopped before one of the windows overlooking the city skyline. "Because power rarely disappears," he said. "It changes hands. Victor believes the old council has become predictable. If today's alliance collapsed publicly, confidence between the families would collapse with it. Investors would hesitate. Trusts would freeze negotiations. Rival groups would move into markets we've protected for decades. One failed wedding could trigger billions in institutional losses." Isabella felt a chill despite the warmth of the corridor. Damien had not simply abandoned her. He had unknowingly become the first piece in a carefully designed strategy. Before she could respond, Lorenzo's phone vibrated once. He read the encrypted message, and for the first time that evening his jaw tightened. Security footage from the private airport had just been enhanced. Damien had not arrived alone. Two unidentified men had escorted him onto the aircraft carrying sealed financial cases marked with the insignia of an offshore investment consortium that had spent years attempting to infiltrate mafia-controlled logistics companies. Lorenzo locked the screen and looked directly into Isabella's eyes. "This isn't over," he said. "Whoever planned today expected your family to fall apart. They never expected us to stand together." The celebration continued beneath glittering chandeliers, but beneath the polished surface, an invisible battle had already begun. Isabella returned to the ballroom beside Lorenzo, every smile carefully practiced, while her mind raced through every conversation she had ever shared with Victor Salerno. Had there been warnings she had ignored, hidden meanings behind ordinary advice? Across the room, Victor stood among several council elders, raising a champagne glass with effortless confidence, looking exactly like the trusted advisor everyone admired. If Lorenzo's intelligence was correct, then the most dangerous man in the ballroom was also the one receiving the loudest congratulations. Isabella suddenly understood why Lorenzo had chosen silence over accusation. One careless move would send the real conspirators into hiding before evidence could be secured. As the orchestra transitioned into another elegant melody, Lorenzo quietly escorted Isabella onto the dance floor. Hundreds of guests applauded, believing they were witnessing the first dance of newlyweds, but every graceful step concealed a strategic conversation. "Victor knows I'm watching him," Lorenzo murmured without breaking rhythm. "He's too experienced not to notice the security changes." Isabella forced a gentle smile for the cameras while answering just as softly. "Then why hasn't he tried to leave?" Lorenzo's expression remained unreadable. "Because he believes he already won. Men who think they're untouchable usually make their biggest mistakes after they celebrate too early." Isabella felt his hand tighten ever so slightly around hers as they turned beneath the brilliant lights, both of them playing perfect newlyweds while silently hunting the architect of a conspiracy. Halfway through the dance, Lorenzo's chief intelligence officer approached discreetly and handed him a sealed envelope before disappearing back into the crowd. Lorenzo waited until the applause masked the sound of the paper unfolding. Inside was a copy of an encrypted financial transfer completed only 40 minutes earlier. Nearly $200 million had been moved from shell companies connected to the Russo family into offshore accounts controlled by anonymous trustees. Isabella immediately recognized one of the authorization codes. It belonged to a dormant succession trust that should have been inaccessible without unanimous council approval. Someone inside the governing body had illegally unlocked protected family assets during the chaos of the abandoned wedding. Before either of them could react, Victor Salerno calmly walked toward the center of the ballroom carrying a crystal glass. He tapped it gently with a silver spoon until every conversation stopped. Wearing the warm smile of a lifelong family friend, he requested everyone's attention for what he called a special blessing for the newly married couple. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Isabella sensed the room changing once again. Whatever Victor intended to say next had not been part of any celebration. It was the next move in a game that had begun long before she ever walked down the aisle. Victor Salerno lifted his crystal glass with effortless confidence, and the ballroom fell into complete silence. His smile was warm, his posture relaxed, and his voice carried the calm authority of a man who had spent decades earning the trust of every powerful family present. "Tonight," he began, "we celebrate not only a marriage but the strength of our united families. May this unexpected union remind us that loyalty always prevails over uncertainty." The guests applauded politely, yet Isabella noticed something unsettling. Several influential council members exchanged brief, almost invisible glances before raising their own glasses. It lasted only a heartbeat, but Lorenzo noticed it too. This was no ordinary toast. It was a silent signal exchanged between people who already knew far more than they should. As applause echoed through the ballroom, Lorenzo leaned closer without taking his eyes off Victor. "Do not react," he whispered. "He's counting how many people follow his lead." Isabella forced a graceful smile while accepting congratulations from passing guests, but inside she felt every instinct screaming that they were standing in the middle of a carefully staged performance. Lorenzo's intelligence division quietly began identifying everyone who had responded to Victor's subtle gesture. Names appeared one after another on encrypted tablets carried by trusted investigators disguised as event staff. Within minutes, an alarming pattern emerged. Every individual connected to Victor also controlled voting rights over family trusts, shipping contracts, or succession committees. This conspiracy had not been built overnight. It had quietly rooted itself inside the council for years. A discreet vibration interrupted Lorenzo's thoughts. Another encrypted report had arrived from his cyber intelligence team. They had successfully breached a hidden communications server linked to Damien's private accounts. Instead of finding messages from frightened friends, they uncovered confidential correspondence between Damien and multiple anonymous investors discussing something called Project Crown. Attached files contained detailed projection showing how public disgrace at the Morty wedding would trigger emergency leadership votes, suspended financial agreements, collapsing market confidence, and forced restructuring across several family enterprises. Isabella's heart pounded as she realized the horrifying truth. Her abandoned wedding had never been the objective. It had merely been the opening move designed to bring entire mafia dynasties under someone else's financial control. Before Lorenzo could quietly remove Victor from the celebration, every light inside the ballroom suddenly went dark. Gasps filled the room as crystal chandeliers disappeared into blackness. A second later, the massive projector above the stage activated by itself. Instead of wedding photographs, security footage began playing across the enormous screen. The first image showed Isabella entering the church earlier that morning. The second showed Damien boarding his private aircraft. Then a third image appeared, freezing the entire ballroom in stunned silence. Standing beside Damien, shaking hands with Victor Salerno, was someone nobody expected to see alive. The former Supreme Chairman of the Mafia Council, officially declared dead 2 years earlier. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos as terrified gasps replaced polite applause. Hundreds of guests stared at the enormous screen, unable to tear their eyes away from the unmistakable face of Alessandro Vito, the former Supreme Chairman whose state funeral had united every major family exactly 2 years earlier. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. She had stood beside her father at that funeral. She had watched the coffin lowered into the family mausoleum. Yet the man smiling beside Victor Salerno in the surveillance footage was undeniably alive. Panic spread across the room as council elders demanded explanations, while security teams instinctively surrounded the exits. Lorenz never moved. His calm expression revealed only one thing: he had prepared for everything except this. The projection abruptly changed to another recording. This time it showed Damien entering a private conference room inside an abandoned waterfront warehouse 24 hours before the wedding. Around the polished table sat Victor Salerno, Alessandro Vito, and several shadowed figures whose faces remained hidden. One sentence echoed clearly through the ballroom speakers: "Once the Morty alliance collapses, the council will beg for new leadership." The recording ended before revealing who had spoken those chilling words, but it was enough. Decades of trust shattered in a single moment. Council members who had spent their lives protecting institutional stability suddenly realized they had been sitting beside conspirators without ever suspecting them. Victor's confident smile disappeared for the first time that evening. He slowly placed his untouched champagne glass onto a nearby table and attempted to slip toward a side exit, but Lorenzo's security division had already anticipated the move. 6 discreetly dressed operatives silently blocked every path without drawing their weapons. The guests watched in stunned silence as Lorenzo walked directly toward Victor, his polished shoes echoing across the marble floor. "Leaving already?" he asked calmly. "The reception has only just begun." Victor's eyes narrowed, yet he forced another smile. "You're making a terrible mistake, Lorenzo. That footage proves nothing." Lorenzo held up a small encrypted device. "Actually, it proves far more than you realize." Before anyone could speak again, Isabella's phone vibrated inside her wedding gown. She frowned as she looked at the unknown encrypted sender. Attached was a single video marked with today's date and the words, "Watch before trusting anyone." Her hands trembled as she opened it. The recording showed Lorenzo himself entering the same warehouse 3 nights earlier. He appeared to shake hands with Alessandro Vito before accepting a sealed black folder. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. The timestamp was authentic, the faces unmistakable. She slowly lifted her eyes toward Lorenzo, who had no idea the video existed. For the first time since he had whispered, "Pretend I'm the groom," doubt quietly entered her heart. Isabella felt the room spinning as the video replayed in her mind. Lorenz, standing inside the abandoned warehouse. Lorenz, shaking hands with the man the entire council believed had died 2 years earlier. Every instinct urged her to confront him immediately, yet something deep inside refused to believe the man who had risked everything to protect her could also be the architect of the conspiracy. She quietly locked her phone before anyone noticed her reaction. Across the ballroom, Lorenzo remained focused on Victor Salerno, completely unaware that someone had planted a seed of doubt powerful enough to destroy everything they had built in a single night. Isabella understood one thing immediately. Whoever had sent the recording wanted her to lose faith in Lorenzo before the truth could surface. Victor suddenly laughed, breaking the suffocating silence. "Interesting timing," he said with unsettling confidence. Perhaps your new husband should explain where he was 3 nights ago." Lorenzo's expression hardened ever so slightly. It was the first time Isabella had seen genuine surprise in his eyes. Council members immediately turned toward him, their trust beginning to fracture beneath the weight of suspicion. Years of respected leadership suddenly stood on the edge of collapse. Lorenzo calmly removed his phone and handed it to his chief intelligence officer. "Verify every second of that recording," he ordered. "I want the original source, editing history, transmission route, and every device that touched it." His voice never wavered, but Isabella noticed his jaw tighten. Someone had anticipated every move he would make. Within minutes, the intelligence officer returned carrying another encrypted tablet. "Boss," he whispered, "the video is authentic, but incomplete." Lorenzo immediately understood. "Play the full recording." The ballroom projector flickered back to life. The original footage appeared again, showing Lorenzo entering the warehouse exactly as before. Gasps spread through the audience. Then the unseen portion continued. Moments after accepting the black folder, Lorenzo secretly attached a microscopic tracking device beneath the conference table before leaving without opening the documents. Several minutes later, Alessandro Vidal entered the room with Victor and Damien, completely unaware they were now being monitored. The edited version had deliberately removed everything, proving Lorenzo had been conducting a covert intelligence operation rather than joining the conspiracy. Before relief could settle over the ballroom, another alert flashed across the intelligence officer's screen. The tracking device Lorenzo planted had just transmitted one final signal before being destroyed. Its location stunned everyone. The signal originated beneath the historic Morty family council chamber itself, directly underneath the building where every succession vote, financial treaty, and leadership election had been held for generations. Lorenzo slowly looked toward Isabella, his eyes filled with quiet urgency. "The wedding was only phase 1, he said. "The real attack is waiting beneath the council." The celebration ended without another toast as the ballroom transformed into an emergency command center. Council elders abandoned their tables, attorneys secured confidential records, and trusted security teams quietly escorted guests through private exits to prevent panic from spreading across the city. Lorenzo wasted no time. Within minutes, a convoy of black armored vehicles raced through Manhattan under the cover of darkness toward the historic Morty Council chamber. Isabella sat beside him in complete silence, her wedding gown flowing across the leather seat, the bouquet resting forgotten at her feet. Less than 12 hours earlier, she had expected to begin a honeymoon. Now she was riding into the heart of a conspiracy threatening every family represented at her wedding. The ancient council chamber stood beneath a century-old stone building that had survived financial crashes, political upheavals, and generations of succession disputes. Its massive bronze doors opened only for official council sessions, yet tonight Lorenzo entered with emergency authorization signed unanimously by every elder present. The chamber appeared untouched until his intelligence specialists activated advanced scanning equipment. Hidden beneath the marble floor, directly below the circular council table, they discovered an unauthorized underground communications hub powered by encrypted satellite transmitters. For years, someone had secretly monitored confidential council meetings, succession discussions, financial negotiations, and security strategies without anyone realizing their most trusted sanctuary had been compromised. As engineers carefully dismantled the concealed equipment, Isabella noticed a familiar family crest engraved onto one of the encrypted data drives. It belonged neither to the Morty family nor the De Luca family. It was the forgotten insignia of the former Supreme Chairman's private office, officially dissolved after Alessandro Vidal's reported death. Lorenzo immediately ordered forensic specialists to decrypt the files while the elders watched in complete disbelief. When the first folders opened, the chamber fell silent. Every confidential vote from the past 5 years had been recorded. Every private disagreement, every financial treaty, every succession recommendation had been copied and organized with terrifying precision. Someone had not merely planned to influence the council. They had been controlling it from the shadows for years. Then the final encrypted folder unlocked automatically. Instead of financial records, it contained tomorrow's agenda for an emergency council session that nobody outside the chamber should have known existed. At the bottom was a single instruction highlighted in red. Upon confirmation of the Morty wedding failure, initiate Article 9. Remove Lorenzo De Luca. Install interim Supreme Chairman. Every elder slowly turned toward Lorenzo, finally realizing the abandoned wedding had never been about Isabella alone. It had been designed to eliminate the one mafia boss capable of stopping a silent coup. Before anyone could react, the chamber lights flickered, every security monitor went black, and a calm voice echoed through the ancient hall. "Congratulations, Lorenzo. You found the room, but you're already too late." The mysterious voice faded into silence, but no one inside the council chamber moved. Lorenzo calmly raised his hand, signaling every security officer to remain exactly where they were. Panic was the final weapon their enemies expected to use against them. Isabella looked around the ancient hall, her heartbeat steady despite everything that had happened since morning. She suddenly noticed something everyone else had overlooked. The voice had not come through the chamber speakers. It echoed from the underground communication system itself. Quietly stepping toward the central council table, she examined the exposed equipment before pulling a small encrypted storage module from beneath the main transmitter. "Stop," she whispered. "This is what they're protecting." Lorenzo immediately understood. Instead of chasing invisible enemies, he ordered his forensic team to secure the device untouched. The trap had never been the room. It was the evidence hidden inside it. Minutes later, the encrypted files were successfully opened under the supervision of every council elder. What appeared on the large screen stunned the entire chamber into absolute silence. Years of forged succession votes, fabricated financial reports, illegal offshore transfers, and manipulated governance records filled the display. Every signature, every authorization, and every secret agreement traced back to Alessandro Vidal and Victor Salerno. Damian Russo had never been anything more than a frightened pawn promised power he could never truly possess. The failed wedding was designed to trigger emergency succession laws, remove Lorenzo from leadership, destroy the Morty family's credibility, and hand control of the legitimate family enterprises to a hidden network operating behind the council. Instead, Lorenzo's unexpected marriage to Isabella had legally preserved the alliance, preventing every emergency clause from taking effect. As dawn broke over Manhattan, federal financial investigators, independent auditors, and family compliance officers arrived with emergency warrants prepared through lawful governance channels. Victor Salerno quietly surrendered without resistance after seeing the evidence displayed before him. Alessandro Vidal's international accounts were frozen within hours, and coordinated operations across several countries dismantled the remaining conspiracy before it could recover. Damian publicly admitted his role before the council, permanently surrendering his succession rights and accepting responsibility for his choices. There were no celebrations, only the quiet restoration of trust through law, evidence, and disciplined leadership. Several weeks later, the Grand Council gathered once more beneath the restored chamber ceiling. This time there were no whispers of betrayal or scandal. Before every elder, Lorenzo removed the ancestral mafia queen's ring from its velvet case and placed it gently into Isabella's hand. The woman abandoned at the altar saved an empire without drawing a weapon, the Supreme Council declared. From this day forward, Isabella Morty De Luca shall serve as mafia queen through wisdom, governance, and integrity. Tears filled her eyes as she looked toward Lorenzo, remembering the single sentence that had changed both their lives forever. He smiled exactly as he had in the ruined ballroom and quietly whispered, "I never pretended to be your groom. I was simply waiting for the right moment to become your husband."